Strawberry fields forever. Strawberry fields forever.
Good morning, everyone. Buenos días a todos. Welcome to the 16th Annual ADE Statewide Conference. We would like to go on and welcome you all. I'm Ana Orozco, pronouns she, hers, ella, and I'm one of the praxis co-practice chair. And then Dindy.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name is Dindy, she, her, also a praxis co-chair. We're so proud and honored to have all of you here. And we're going to start our program shortly. You see people are coming into the rooms, but we're going to go ahead and start just because we have a very full and exciting program. So maybe next one. Okay. So we do want to begin by just introducing ourselves. This is Ade, and this is our Mesa. Ade LA, like we said, Anna and myself this year are the praxis chairs, but everything that we do here is a labor of love, and what a labor of love it is. You might be here because of the social media genius of Maria and Jessica. Lupe is our amazing chair for the year. Teresa does the most amazing community liaison work. Get to know about her. Kelly keeps up with us. She's the secretary, doing amazing work. Beatriz, you'll be hearing from later, and she inspires you to join and become a member. We have Dope Youth, Jonathan, and Paloma is also one of our community liaisons. So this is who we are, and we want to thank you again for joining us. Very exciting program. We did think we would have it in person, but we're still here together nonetheless.
Good morning, everybody. I'm Guadalupe Carrasco Cardona, and I'm the ADE Los Angeles Praxis Chair. But I really wanted to stress the fact that this is the 6th annual statewide conference. And the way that we organize our conferences is it's collective. And so there's a lot of work that goes on before today that incorporates the work of our siblings that are members in the chapter of Sacramento, the members of the chapter in San Diego, and also the members of the chapter in Santa Barbara, our newest chapter. And they will actually have a workshop today for those who are interested in maybe creating a chapter in your area. But we are ADE Los Angeles, and this year it was our pleasure, right, to be responsible for hosting the statewide conference. And as Dindy, one of our praxis co-chairs, stated, we had planned for this to be in person at one of our LAUSD school sites. And due to some of the pandemic situations, we were unable to solidify that. But we really hope that next year we will be able to do this in person. And I believe it has been decided, I know it was discussed, that the next conference would be hosted by ADE Santa Barbara. So put that on your calendar for next year. Around this time, you should be hearing about a conference that will be our first in person. So our 17th annual will be back in person again. But I also, before I pass the mic back, I want to say thank you to all of the members of our statewide concilio. The statewide concilio meets monthly and beyond to ensure that the organization stays strong. I want to say thank you to all of our MESA who Dindy just shared with you who we are, and especially Anna and Dindy for the amazing work that they did to ensure that today could happen. I want to say thank you to all of our presenters. We have 11 workshops across 3 sessions that are going to be happening with our program, and there's some really amazing people that are going to share some beautiful insights into the work that they do, and how you too can continue this work and do the good stuff that is happening across the state in your areas. So I want to say thank you to each and every presenter. And lastly, I want to say, actually double lastly, I want to say thank you to DJ George Grunauer, who has been working behind the scenes to ensure that we have our music program for our breaks today and for the entrance and exit. And also thank you to Luis J. Rodriguez for accepting the invitation to be our keynote speaker. So I'm going to go ahead and pass it back now to our praxis chairs.
Thank you so much. We're going to follow next with a land acknowledgement. For us, a land acknowledgement are not just sentiments, but a real commitment. And Kelly Flores will lead us in this.
Thank you, Dindy. Yes, so we always begin our meetings with a land acknowledgement and an ancestor acknowledgement. So let me go ahead and lead us in this. We acknowledge that the land and the peoples to whom this land belongs, this is the land of the Tongva Nation, and they are still here. And we stand in solidarity with all Indigenous people and their right to self-determination and justice. We commit to working toward the healing of the generational trauma, theft, and dispossession Native peoples have faced and continue to face.
Thank you so much. And one part that I always like to emphasize are that the Tongva people, where most of us in LA are situated, are a state recognized tribe, but they are not federally recognized. And that is one of their demands. And so if you want to concretely support and our own Indigenous people who are still here, that's one of the things that's important to them and something that they're fighting for. And next we have our ancestor acknowledgement. I believe that's Dr. Teresa Montaño.
All right. Good morning, everyone. So I just want to acknowledge that we sit on the shoulders of great women who have come before us both as community-based activists and as strong labor union organizers. Today, we want to acknowledge Emma Tenayuca for her work among pecan workers and Lucy Gonzalez Parsons for her work among workers throughout the entire country. We also want to give a shout out to the Amazon workers, the newly formed Union of Amazon Workers, and to their newly elected president, who was fired by Amazon for union organizing, and who reminded Jeff Bezos that it was good that he was up in space because it gave them time to organize a union. So with that, I'll pass it back to our Dindy or Anna.
Thank you so much. Go ahead, Anna.
So as ARE, Association of Raza Educators, we go back to these objectives and principles, whatever we're doing when it comes to activism, when it comes to involvement in the community, we make sure that it goes back to these specific principles that we will be sharing with all of you. And if something doesn't match up with the principles, then we won't be participating in it. So first off, number one, to promote critical pedagogy as a principal means of addressing the question of how to teach our children. 2, struggle for democratic education where the parents and community have the same rights as teachers, counselors, and administrators in the education of their children.
Okay. Number 3, to promote community activism among teachers. 4, nurture student activism and develop student activists. And 5, to struggle to reclaim spaces in the institution, that is schools, for progressive education and to develop politically active teachers. And so that is who ARE is, and we're so glad that you could join us. And so we are very ready for our keynote speaker. We're extremely proud and so honored to have Luis Rodriguez. If we had to mention all of his accomplishments and everything that he has done, it would not fit on a page. But Luis Rodriguez is a veteran of the Chicano movement, having walked out during the 1968 East LA school blowouts and arrested during the 1970 Chicano moratorium against the Vietnam War. He's been active in gang peace and intervention for 50 years and has taught, read poetry, done talks in prisons, juvenile lockups, and jails for 40 years. He is a renowned writer with 16 books, including the best-selling memoir, Always Running, La Vida Loca, Gang Days in LA. He is the founding editor of Tia Chucha Press and the co-founder of Tia Chucha's Central Cultural and Bookstore in the Northeast San Fernando Valley. And that was from 2014 to 2016. And he's also served as LA's Poet Laureate. And so we just want to welcome you, Luis. Thank you so much. And now the stage is yours. Thank you.
Muchas gracias. Thank you, everybody. I'm really honored to be here. I think this is such an important topic that I want to spend a little bit of time exploring some of what I learned, some of my thinking on this. I want to start by, first of all, thanking you all for being here because, you know, we're in I would say we're in the middle of a very important leap forward as a community. And I think this requires being ready for it, prepared, studying, understanding the world that we're in, understanding ourselves. And I think that this is what we got to teach our kids. I find that a lot of our kids want something new, imagination. They call it reimagination. It's very powerful, but they're not really properly prepared sometimes. Sometimes they are for what they have to do to help reset the kind of world that we're in, reset the states, reset the schooling. So I want to start by first pointing out the importance of the word revolution, because I am a revolutionary and I always had to think about, well, what does that mean? I'm a conscious thinker, studier, but also activist. I do both. I study and I'm always writing. I'm always exploring the issues, but I'm also out there organizing. And it's important that we don't become schizophrenic in that world. You know how people do one, not the other. You know that we have a lot of activists. Sometimes they don't know what they're doing. Sometimes they don't study. We have a lot of people who study, but they're not out there doing things. It's important to not be one in that sense. We have two parts of it, but it's important to have both. So my life has been that way. I can't even say I was smart enough to figure that out. It just ended up that way. But I think it's important that revolution be understood as what happens or should happen when the tensions in a crisis get so acute, something has to move. You know what I'm saying? And generally the revolution moves things forward. It's possible that things can go backward if other forces are involved. But in general, the way nature works and everything that we see, there's a leap forward. Things get more mature. Things get more complex. Things get more resolved. You resolve the tension in some kind of way. And in our society, we're at that acuteness. Everything is so unraveling. You know what I'm saying? Everything's falling apart. Every institution is in crisis. Everything that we're seeing from the pandemic all the way to the war in the Ukraine, everything is forcing all the issues to be like, it sets a mode of, it seems like things are going to be destroyed at some level because that's the destructive nature of crisis. It can be. But crisis also means something new is trying to be born. The tension is that something new is trying to wake up and be part of the scene. And we have to understand that so that we can be part of that what we would call the ones that help push the baby forward, you know, and not the ones that keep working with all the destructive elements. Something has to die, something has to be born. And so to me, revolution is when it gets pushed to such a level that we can actually birth a new idea, a new world, a new way of organizing, a new way of thinking, a new way of pushing forward the human evolutionary development of everybody being able to share in what we have in this world. And to me, that's important, that we integrate everything as best we can. So I mentioned that because I'm a revolutionary then, because I have been studied, I've also written, and I've also been out there organizing. I'm a revolutionary, but I think what makes a revolutionary very important is that they can read, as they say, the winds. The winds are blowing. They can read what's up. You know, you prepare so that when things seem like are going to move forward, you can discern that. Education to me teaches a lot about discernment. A lot of people don't have enough education to even discern what's going on. So they don't know how to figure it out. We got to teach our young people so that they can figure it out anytime. And I will have to say something about young people. They're much more aware than even some people give them credit. I've seen young people step up with some amazing ideas, and you think, how do they get this wisdom? Well, part of that wisdom is in their bones. They're tapping into something old. These young people who are so wise now is because they're able to tap into genetic memory. And that's important because we're carrying all this memory from all our ancestors. Everything's in us, but we've been blocked. When I hear young people speaking with such wisdom, I know they're tapping into something very old. So I'm a revolutionary for that reason. I also want to point out the importance of the word radical, because people misapply this. And I've seen even young people, unfortunately, not young people, other people, weaponize radicalism. You know what I'm saying? But radical, what it really means to me is getting to the root of things. Just getting to the heart of the matter. Not just working at the features, not just managing crisis, not just everything that this society does, but really getting to the root. Why is this happening? What can we do at the root level? And that's what I think a radical is and should be. It's not just having the most progressive ideas. You know what I'm saying? And it's good. That's just not what it is. It's not appearances of I'm a radical. It's really going to the root and working at the root level of our society, of our communities, and our families. So having said that, I also want to bring in another important point, the democratization of our education, which I saw in Ada's points that they represent. And to me, it's very important. I call it what the problem that we've had in our schools is, well, what I would call the poverty. There's a lot of poverties. We have a lot of poverty. Economic poverty becomes spiritual poverty, becomes emotional poverty. There's a lot of poverty that we're going walking around, but one of them is the poverty of access. The biggest problem is that we don't have access to what everything society can provide. And so this pushes us to not be educated or, again, given the tools we need to actually navigate the world that we're in. We're not given access to that knowledge. So there's where you have elite educational systems. Some people are given all the access, all the money, and all the ability. They're not smarter than us, they're not better than us, but they have it, privilege, it's a race, class, all these things come in there and they push these people. And the rest of us are very smart, intelligent, wise, as I point out, but we don't have access to those tools, those resources. And this is what puts us behind the 8 ball. And I think it's important to fight the poverty of access. If we're gonna make education available for everyone, that's what it should be. Everyone should be properly educated. And that's access. We need to know what we need to know to not just survive, but to thrive. So it's important that we push that forward. And I love that idea. I just want to start real quickly with my own story, because I know it's a story of many of you, but it helped mold the way I'm thinking. I was 2 years old when my family left Ciudad Juarez, Mexico. And I mentioned that because Ciudad Juarez, just like almost all Chihuahua, before the pre-contact period, were a lot of indigenous tribes. They weren't the only one, but the largest was the Raramuri, or what people call Tarahumara. They've been there for tens of thousands of years. They were part of the Chihuahuan desert. That, people say forever. They've been there. They're not the only tribes in Chihuahua, but they're one of the largest ones. That Chihuahua desert goes into US, Mexico, two countries and several states. But when the border came down, now we don't belong. You know what I'm saying? The people that were part of those tribes, even their progeny, people who were born afterwards, don't even know who they are anymore. We don't know what we are, and we are treated. I was born in El Paso, Texas. My mother went across the border to have me born, but she was now an alien, illegal, a foreigner, you know what I'm saying, a stranger. Here's a woman who has ties to that land as deep as anyone, thousands of years. That border comes, and now she's no longer belongs. And I think that's an important point. I was 2 years old when we moved to Watts in South Central LA. And the Watts at the time, as you know, because of restrictive covenants, even though the laws had changed, they still were valid in the communities. Black and brown people were forced to live in the poorest communities. And they lived together for the most part. A lot of what LA is Black and brown ghetto barrios. You know what I'm saying? Pacoima's like that, all of South Central LA, Compton, all these are brown and black communities that have been there for generations. This is not new. When I moved into Watts, Central Avenue used to divide the majority Mexicans on one side and the majority blacks on the other. Now that got changed pretty quickly, but I moved into the black side of Watts, which you can't really say black side, but you just say there was more blacks on that side than on the other. I had no problem with the community there. What I had problem with, entering the schools, the teachers were white, the principal was white, and the first thing they did is went almost discombobulated because of Mexicans were coming in. Because they couldn't speak the language, they had no room for them, they didn't know what to do. What they did with me is they put me in a corner, building blocks, playing with blocks for a whole year, and ignored me. They had no time for me when I first went to school. If I spoke Spanish, I was punished. Once I was swatted. Another time, which to me was one of the worst times, is a teacher slapped me in front of the whole class. When you're 6 years old, you know what I'm saying? This is the schooling that I got. And since then, schooling went downhill. You know, it didn't get better. It got worse. And I mention all this because we ended up moving to San Gabriel Valley. And I want to say something about this because it's the story of all of us. San Gabriel Valley at the time had 100 Mexican migrant communities. They came to pick the oranges, the walnuts, whatever was there. But by the time we moved there, the groves were gone. Now it was these poor Mexican communities, 100 of them. Some of them with dirt roads, chickens and goats in people's backyards, little shacks. You know, it looked like Appalachia. I tell people when I go there, but it was even denser than Appalachia. There was all these housing together. And I moved in a community that was one of these migrant communities just north of Montebello. And we were dirt roads. There was nothing there except our homes, surrounded by well-off white people. I'm not talking about poor people. I'm talking about suburbs. You know, Montebello was a white suburb at one time. Monterey Park, Alhambra, all these communities were whites and they were racist and they acted like racists. And if you happen to walk into the neighborhood from these migrant communities, you were treated as you didn't belong. They had the sheriff's department. I don't mind talking about this because the sheriffs are under a lot of scrutiny. They've been scrutiny for years, but now they're really getting more. They were the army of these races. And they would suppress us, oppress us, and even kill us because I lost 4 friends to police in the 60s when I was growing up. Many more have died since then, but 4 friends. And that's a lot to lose in one life. And unarmed, who were killed by deputies and or other police. So I mention all this because that was the world I was in. I ended up going to schools where they tracked us. And then I know tracking is not an issue now, but it is. I've seen it still. They don't call it that. What they did, they tracked us. All the Mexicans were going to the industrial arts. They made it sound cool, industrial arts. All the white kids were going to the academic classes. They were, and this is in my own high school. This wasn't just one high school over there. And I happened to be in a high school where the poor kids, poor Mexican kids, and by the way, poor white kids that happened to live in our neighborhood, because that's the problem. There wasn't that many white people, but they were poor and they were in our neighborhood. And we never saw them as white people. We saw them as homies, just so you know. This wasn't just a racial thing. This is like poor whites were with us. But these whites were with money and they were against all of us. And they put us in the worst classes. I learned auto shop, print shop, wood shop. I learned a lot of shops. I was very smart though, like a lot of us. Just because you might be troubled as a kid doesn't mean you're not smart. In fact, most troubled kids are probably very smart. I was a troubled kid, but I was very smart. And yet they wouldn't give me the classes that I should have gone to better myself. I ended up being tracked. Why? Because all the Mexicans in those migrant communities, and this includes East LA as overall, but let's just look at San Gabriel Valley, were being tracked into the industries. San Gabriel Valley, East LA was highly industrialized. All of South Central was industrialized. It was the Alameda corridor of factories, mills. People don't know that LA was and continues to be the largest manufacturing city in the country. I know it's hard to imagine because we think about Hollywood, we think about beaches, we think about Disneyland. We don't think about all the industry. It's more than Chicago and Detroit and Philadelphia and these places, even though those are highly industrial places. We always had more. We had huge garment industry when my mother worked in as a costurera. We had steel mills, we had auto plants, we had rubber plants, we had defense industries, we had oil refineries everywhere. This is the way the world that I was brought in. And all the kids in East LA, South Central, and San Gabriel Valley that were Mexican migrants were being tracked into those industries. So you got schools that had some of the best welding classes. Those were the Mexican schools, like Garfield was known for that. Roosevelt High School in East LA at one point had a whole floor on the top floor of sewing machines, preparing people to be in the sewing industry. You know what I'm saying? Our education level was worse because they didn't want us to do any better than to work in those places. We were being tracked. So I was being tracked into that world, and I ended up working in that world when I left my life in La Vida Loca. When I left the crazy life, I ended up working in a paper mill. I worked in a steel mill for 4 years. I worked in our chemical refinery. I worked in construction. I worked as a smelter. I mean, I don't know if you guys know that battle of that lead foundry in Vernon that poisoned 150,000 people, Boyle Heights, Southeast LA, other parts of LA. I worked in that foundry. I was a smelter working there. So we all worked in that industry, but here's what happened. And this is why education keeps shifting. Industry started to leave. Remember, it started in the 70s, but by the 80s, LA by 1984 lost 300 plants, factories, and mills. And then it went down from there. We still have some of those industries, but they're almost all gone. What happened is by the end of the 80s, the whole country deindustrialized. I know Chicago did it. There was big mills in Chicago, stockyards gone. Pittsburgh, all the major places where industry was going on was gone. They call it the Rust Belt, but they forget that LA was one of the biggest Rust Belt communities there was. What did that do? That took the economic life out of our communities. And again, education didn't prepare us for anything else. Technology was developing, but we weren't the ones learning the new technology. We weren't given the access. There's a poverty of access. Black and brown people, poor people, working class people were not given that access. So as they were creating Silicon Valley and all this new technology, we were not accessing it. Again, we're left behind the 8 ball, constantly pushed, and the schools play a role in this. Schools should be above all this, you would think. We don't care who you are, how poor you are, you're all gonna get properly educated, you're all gonna have an opportunity, but that's not the way it works. This is why I know that even though they claim that tracking doesn't exist, it does exist. Our kids aren't being tracked to the new world that's being created. We're being pushed out of it constantly. We're being pushed out of the capitalist economy. That's what's happening. And so some people, not all people, get into crime. I get it. Gangs become important, become cohesive. But most people just work wherever jobs they can. They try to survive, not thrive. And this is where I think we're at as far as education, to make sure that everybody has the same full-on, equal, equitable way to get properly prepared for the world that we're in. That's what I think is important about what we have to do as educators and as thinkers and as organizers. I want to mention this because I think there's another element that I want to bring in. And I'm going to try to be quick with this because it's something that I would like to explore with other people anytime I've written about it. But I went back to my own indigenous roots because of my mother's Tarahumara roots. I decided to go indigenous. I decided that, look, I'm Chicano, I get it, but I have indigenous roots and I need to go back to them. And I didn't want to just go back to them as an archaic thing. You know what I'm saying? Like a nice thing to do. I wanted to go back to their teachings. And I spent many years, 30 years, trying to study the indigenous way of thinking, of cosmology, organizing. And I learned a lot. I have teachers among the Lakota, the Dene. I have teachers among the Mexica and Mayan from both Mexico and Central America. And I have teachers among the Quechua. I went all over the place to Quechua and Peru. I went all over the place to learn. I went in the reservation. I got elders and teachers. That was one of my journeys, my quest. I wanted to go back to my mother's roots. I even went to Sierra Tarahumara, the Copper Canyon. I spent time with them to learn about what they knew. And I want to share with you a few things that I picked up and learned. I can't get into all of it, but I will tell you a few things which I think is pertinent for our education. And I call it the 4 key connections. These are 4 areas that some of you might have heard. I've spoken on this. I have a couple of TED Talks. One of them is about this. But I want to share with you because I think schools have an obligation to help us with these 4 key connections that all human beings should have and should understand. And I also looked at mythology, the great stories of great religions and thinkers and cultures. Mythologies all deal with the 4 key connections in one form or the other. They might do with 1 or 2 or 3, 4. They might do all of them, but they all address these 4 key connections. So let me share with you what they are and why they're important, because we need to teach this to our young people. And if we can't get it in our schools, then we should teach it in our culture centers and our community centers, create our own schools. We need to find a way to educate our people in spite of the system. You know what I'm saying? So here's what I would say the first one is. The first one is the very important connection to nature. And I don't mean like nature is like all around us. We've got trees and all this, it's all nice, but to really understand the laws, rhythms, and patterns. Nature is our best university. Nature teaches you things about how things work. Again, revolution is part of a leap. Where does that leap come from? It comes from the tensions and crisis. Nature teaches you things, teaches you to do that. I remember I was walking with some Pomo and Yurok indigenous people earlier, and we went to this land that had been logged, completely logged, and we were walking over all this. It's really hard. With logs and everything everywhere we were walking. I said, I'm not sure if I can walk through this. And he says, oh yeah, you can, but you got to pay attention, because nature teaches you pay attention. You're walking, and if you're not careful, you will fall, you will trip, you will stumble on something. You pay attention. We don't learn this in life because this part of nature is not given to us anymore. We don't learn that nature has both beautiful, wonderful, amazing things and also has poisonous things. How do we learn that? Why does nature have those things? This is what I would think is important, that we have a deep connection to nature. The other important one, because that's external somewhat, but we are also nature. So the other important thing is, what is the connection to our own nature? This to me is important because every human being has their own gifts, their own talents, their own propensities, their own passions. We don't ever individualize learning so that everybody can figure out what they're here to do. We teach people standards, like we're all going to end up in the same place. We're not all going to end up there. And I'm not saying that some people can't do good with the standards. I'm saying it's not for everybody. You got to teach specifically to that human being. We don't do this anymore. We don't know how to individualize to that. I get the general education, get the knowledge of nature, get the knowledge of the world, but then how do we address what you're here to do in this world? What is your art? What do you love? That we don't do. So people end up working or even going to college, getting in fields, get degrees in areas they have no interest in because there's money in it, or because somebody says it's easy, or somebody says whatever it is. You can make a better life for doing that, but you're dying inside because you're not doing what you love. And I have a brother, Pobrecito, he died about 3 years ago, who loved to play music, who loved to wrestle, who loved martial arts when he was a kid. That got him out of gangs. He was in theater. He was doing things. I wasn't one of those kids. I was not doing that then, but he was doing it. But he had to work. He ended up working in factories. He got married. That marriage didn't work out. And then he married somebody else. He ended up working as a phone installer. He worked for the AT&T for 35 years. You know what? He loved to play in jazz bands when he was a teenager. He would go to bars, 21 year old over, but he was 17, 18 years old playing in these bands. They were black and brown bands out of South LA, and he loved it. He was playing beautiful bass. I asked him one time, what happened to your bass? And he looked at me, and he was like one of these guys that wouldn't cry, like my dad. And then emotionally, he wouldn't cry, but I saw a tear come down his eye. He said it was hidden away somewhere in the basement or somewhere, wherever he put it, the attic, I think. But I saw the pain that in 35 years, he could never do what he loved. He's a good man, worked hard, raised a good family, great father, great grandfather, but he was dispirited. You know what I'm saying? It's important that we get the nature of ourselves. The next important nature we need to understand is relationships. This has to do with ethics and morality and connections, but it has to do with connecting people respectfully. We don't know how to do that. This world is about dividing us, keeping us at each other's throats, using one people against another, finding all kinds of ways to divide us, whether it's skin color, whether it's power, whether it's money, all kinds of ways that are all made up. That's all made up stuff. Borders. People are dying constantly for borders. Human made, not God made, not nature made, not human beings making up, and people are dying for them. And I think that this is important that we recognize that we need to have to reconnect our relationships as constantly nurturing and medicine and healing our relationships with each other, our relationships as human beings. As John Trudell would say, we're constantly losing our ability to be human, to understand our humanity. That's what the world does. It puts a value on everything, puts a value on you, puts a money value on who you are and your worth. And pretty soon you don't even know who your next neighbor is. Now you're looking at everybody askew. You don't trust nobody. They teach us these things. And this is important for us to get back to the nature of our relationships. Love others as you want to be loved. I think that's a very powerful thing. All religions have that some form or the other. But I think with indigenous people, it was always take responsibility for yourself and others. Whatever you do impacts not just you, but other people. And the fourth one that I'll have to add, because I know my time is going away, but I want to leave this for your proceedings, because you got really important proceedings going on. I saw the agenda. And it's very powerful. And I just hope this helps guide some of those proceedings. I will have to say that I'm going to have to leave. I won't be able to stay, unfortunately. Which I want to apologize for, because I wish I could stay and learn and interact with all of y'all. But I just want to leave you with this. But the last one is important, and that I call it the connection to the divine. Now, this is a tricky one. People think of divine, they think of religion. I don't think of it that way. I think religion is also a man-made thing. You know what I mean? And some of it is good, some of it is not so good. I think that what really is natural to us is to always seek the divine. What is the divine? That otherworldly connection to the material world that we're in. People call it spirit. People do it with ceremony. People do it with dance, do it with song. I also think just being a creative human being touches the divine. You know what I'm saying? When you're doing an art, when you're doing poetry, when you're doing a music, when you're dancing or whatever it might be, it's all touching the divine. You're touching things beyond just the functional material aspects of our lives, which are important. It's the feminine in all of us, the creative source of everything, that feminine that everybody carries, that's in Mother Earth, it's in ourselves. And so I think that's important to understand. We got to teach this too, how to be creative, how to be artistic, how to be the full, complete human being, which is, to me, is to be some kind of artist. That's what human beings are. And we're not taught that. You know what we're taught? Art is something only certain people should do. There's a lot of schools that don't even teach art. No music, no nothing. I never learned poetry and writing that when I was going to school. I learned it in the community. I learned it in the barrio. I learned it in the ghetto. I learned it in our communities. I learned it in the hood. I learned it from people interacting. I learned it from gang kids who had beautiful words and knew how to do it. I learned it from hip hop. I learned it from all. I didn't learn it in the schools. This is important that people get, that we have to get that connection to the divine. I call it the divine, but you call it whatever it is. Creative energy, spirit. Among the Mexica, we call it Ometel, which is the they, them of creative energy, you know, feminine, masculine, and all its spectrum and all its complexity. Feminine, masculine, not as binaries, not as stuck, not as stasis, but really complex. That's how it Ometel is. And that's what we say to honor that. So I want to mention that because I think it's important that we learn and teach that to our kids and not just leave it where the schools want to keep it, which is very fractured, very compartmentalized, you become a professional and then you become disconnected from your own emotions, let alone the emotions of others. All these things that happens in our world, we got to teach our kids to be human again, fully human. And I would say, emphasize these 4 key connections. And then I just want to end with one last thing. I mean, this has to do with the three things, but it's important because 3 is an important number for cosmology and everything else. And that is that there's 3 things that I think all schools should teach in one form or the other. Besides the 4 key connections, which are complex. And one is we're in the country in a battle about truth. We don't even know what's true anymore. People are manipulating, lying, and making it truthful. Their whole media is based on lies. And this is not new. The very beginnings of our country, the very beginnings of the system, capitalism is always based on lies. And that's important to know that this is a trajectory that goes way back. It just seems very clear now, maybe because social media is making it clear. People are upfront lying to you. People who you would think are telling the truth, like teachers. Some teachers are great. Most of them are great. Most of them are wonderful. But I have heard a lot of lies from teachers. It's just the nature of what's been taught them that they end up teaching us. We have to get back to the truth. What is the truth? How to get to truth? Truth is obtainable. That's important because people make it seem like you can't get it. So truth is one of the things we have to get to. Science, we want to call it science, whatever you want to call it. But to me, science is not removed from spirit. Science is not another compartment. It's part of life, and we can get to that. The second thing that we need to do is learn about being good human beings, decent human beings. And you know what? All religions, if they have any values, that they're supposed to all teach you that. And I think most of them have that as intent. I get that people distort it and misinterpret everything. I think all religion has the idea. They don't, I tell people, if anybody's Christian or Muslim or Buddhist or even indigenous, native, the goal of them is not to make them better Christians or better Buddhists or better Muslim or better Indians. The goal is to make them better human beings, more decent, more complete, more whole, more healthy. That should be the goal. Every path that you're on, I'm on the red road, but that red road doesn't mean that I'm exhumed or immune from being a human being decent. I better learn to be a decent human being out of this red road. And if it doesn't allow me to do that, who needs it? You know what I'm saying? Who needs that? Every path you're on should lead you there. And that's something that all of us can get there, regardless of what road you take. It's all valid to me. And even if you say, I don't got no religion, I'm an atheist, all power to you, become a decent human being anyway. Because that's still what we all need to do regardless. And then the last thing I just want to say, and I'm going to end with this, is we need more beauty in this world. There's so much ugliness. And there's beauty everywhere. There's beauty in nature, so you see it everywhere you go. I'm constantly now paying attention, like my indigenous elders have told me, see beauty in all kinds of places. Beauty in flowers and trees and people and animals. There's beauty all over the place. But then also the creation of beauty, that we are also creators of great beauty in this world. That's why we need more poetry. We need more art. We need more dance. We need more theater. We need more, we need human beings to feel that their job is to create more beauty, to leave the world with great beauty. And that's education too. We shouldn't separate that. That's part of education. So let me end with that. I love you all. Thank you for inviting me. I'll hang on for a little bit, but I will have to leave, unfortunately. But I really am honored. And as you all know, I am running for governor, and I don't want to say too much about it other than I got endorsed by the LA chapter. And I mention all this because I'm trying to bring this kind of thinking to the governance. I'm not trying to run for governor because I'm a politician in normal sense, that I'm trying to gain. I don't want to gain nothing. I want to bring this kind of thinking and way of acting and way of organizing to how we run our state in particular, but everything else. There's a huge gap between how things get governed and how people live. Let's close that gap. Thank you all very much. Love you. Lots of pamati. Gracias. Thank you, everybody.
Oh, thank you so much. I don't know if other people are feeling this, but if you are feeling the love and like this type of dropping of knowledge at 9 a.m. on a Saturday, please emojis or whatever needs to happen in the chat. And I'm really hoping, Luis, you can stick around for maybe another 5 or 10 minutes, because hopefully maybe we can get to, you just kind of did the great teacher thing, which is leave a little bit of space for a question or two. And so if there's a question or two, we'll be happy to take it. But this was my takeaway, and like, I don't know, I had chills. So you told us what it means to be a revolutionary, and I think we all need to think about what it is that our role is in that place. You talked about a crisis, and that made me think of Winston Churchill. neoliberal who we don't love or are interested in. But who says never let a good crisis go to waste? And you can see the neoliberals, the oligarchs, the fascists, and everybody who's against people in general be about that. That's who made money in a pandemic, during this racial uprising, through all the type of misery as ordinary people that we face and understand. And so I'm glad that you thought about crisis in this kind of way, and that you projected in a way to think about not that they're not just death and the negativity, but a projection of rebirth and life and what it is that we want. And the principles you brought forward, I thought were really beautiful. I love how you promote this idea that it's not that our schools don't have students that need to do or have what it needs. Our schools are not underserved, they are under-resourced. And I love how that you point that out. And then the return to the source and our own indigeneity. Most of us on here are indigenous folks, folks of color, Black people, brown people, Native people, Asian people are on this call. I think that's very important. That was very important to me. This idea, Cabral talks about it, a Black revolutionary, return to the source. How can culture kind of help us subvert white supremacy, white supremacist culture and colonization, and help us kind of move forward together and not in a balkanized sense, was kind of what I was getting from you. And then you talked a little bit about really beauty and joy and promoting those types of things. And I'm just kind of waiting to see if there's a question on here. If there isn't, the question, just your journey through the 60s and where you are right now, the question I might have is, maybe if you can elucidate or talk a little bit more about the role of the arts in this thing that we're calling revolutionary love. So if you're a young person who's stuck somewhere in a school, or a teacher who doesn't have the support, or community member who doesn't know what to, how can we subvert what we don't want through the arts? And I know you've been doing this for many, many years. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think the arts are transformative. They're essential. And people don't always use those words. We introduced it to Thea Chutas and other people, not just us, to get people to see the arts wasn't just a nice thing to do. It wasn't just another service area. It was actually vital for communities to transform themselves. Now, we had whole communities, and I'm just going back to LA, but I'm sure many of you who are from other parts of the state can relate to this, where there's no bookstores, no cultural cafes, no movie houses. In LA, the entertainment capital of the world, you got whole neighborhoods, South LA, East Side, Northeast Valley, the harbor, no movie houses. You can't even go see a movie. There is no place for arts to be expressed. For a long time in LA, murals, we were the mural capital of the world, and then it was outlawed. You couldn't paint murals. And when graffiti was popping up, beautiful graffiti, it brought the world to LA. You know, we were the #1 tourist area for graffiti. People were coming to Venice and Disneyland, but that's not really what most people went to see, the graffiti. And then they went and put that graffiti abatement thing where they started putting millions of dollars to paint over all the graffiti and eventually murals. This is what happened. They destroyed the essential arts. So I just want to add that we want to make sure the arts is key to whatever you do. It turns all the keys of all the learning. I'm a terrible mathematician, not because I don't have math in me, because the way schools taught it. If it was done passionately, creatively, I would be a great mathematician, I'm sure of it. I just can't do it because of the way it was taught. Creativity flows into all subjects.
And then we're going to take Josue's question. Thanks.
Okay. Hi, Luis.
You know,
I want to ask a question. At my school, I'm a Chicano,
yeah.
and I'm trying to do some things in my school, like activism and like writing newspapers for the school press. But I want to know, how can I use the crisis right now for the school to spread Chicano awareness?
Well, I love that you're trying to use your school paper, because I, as I say to everybody, as revolutionaries, as radicals, as organizers, as thinkers, we need to occupy every space. I don't turn nothing over to the corporations, to the white supremacists. We have to fight for all of it. They're taking over a lot of media. They're taking over a lot of things. And many of us possibly are saying, I don't want to bother with it. I don't. I think if you write for your newspaper, use that space to bring forth the radical, important ideas that you feel can help the school, include everybody, involve everybody, and make it a school that's healthy for everybody. I think that should be one of the things you do. I became a journalist, by the way, because I wanted to do that. I saw journalism as one terrible lie after another, or mostly erasure. Black, brown, women, queer, we weren't involved in anything. Nobody told our stories. So I became a journalist to make sure some of our stories could be told. I got blacklisted from journalism, by the way, which is understandable because I took a lot of issues on. The one issue I took on was I exposed the killing of a homeless man in San Bernardino when I worked for the San Bernardino Sun. And the police chief and the editor of the paper played golf every Sunday. And they went after me to stop me from telling this story. And when I resigned, because I said, hey, this isn't journalism to me, I'm resigning, they kept me from being able to work at any daily newspaper ever again. It's okay. I still kept writing. I still keep writing. Now I've written for the LA Times and the Orange County Register and the San Bernardino Sun again. I keep at it. I keep finding those spaces. So I just say, Josue, do that writing. If you got a newspaper, occupy it, use it to teach, and anything else you can do to keep the motion of our livelihoods and our being and our indigeneity, as was brought up. All of us have it. We have roots with indigeneity, no matter who we are. Just bring that to the fore, not as old archaic ideas, but as ideas that will guide us into the future.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Well, we're going to go ahead and do just one more because I know how much everyone valued everything Luis has said. So Roberto, and then after that, I know there's still questions and what have you, and we'll try and work them out at different time. So Roberto, go ahead. Thank you.
Okay, buenas tardes o buenos días, Ya vamos por las tardes. Luis, thank you for those words. So my name is Roberto Cepeda. I'm with Project Rebound. I'm a student at Project Rebound at San Diego State. I was able to meet you, Luis, right? Recently up in Oakland on a trip to visit to Alcatraz. Project Rebound is part of a program in San Diego State dealing with restorative justice. So I'm been impacted by the mass incarceration. But in terms of education, I'm finding that sometimes in higher education, I feel that, like as you were saying, Luis, some of the stuff that's being taught, it's like, I think to myself, why wasn't I taught this stuff before? Like I contemplate as I'm in class, I'm like, who was it that thought me dumb enough not to have learned this stuff a lot sooner, right? Sometimes I feel out of place. Sometimes I feel like I want to do more. I want to speak the truth. So that is pushing me to address, or tell a different narrative. I do volunteer work for the CMPP, writing articles on my experience and the political aspect of how all these things affect us and keep us from moving forward, right? Bettering ourselves. And I'm also trying to get a newsletter going for Project Rebound and things like that, but not because I think I'm the smartest, but because I know it has to be done. That counter narrative is so important, right? To show that different side, or show that that other aspect that is not being told. But my question to you, Luis, is how valid are my emotions when I'm in those educational settings and where I feel this is a waste of time? This, I feel anger, I feel upset of not being taught this stuff before, because I did go that route, that lifestyle that led me down to prison, where in high school I felt like I don't want to go to school no more. I never perceived going to college and working at the same time, because all they taught in high school was join the army. So again, my question is, how valid are those emotions? Should I be feeling those emotions while I'm in San Diego State and feeling like, this is a waste of time? Like I felt like, they've taught down to me. Is that valid?
Well, Thank you, Roberto. I want to be deep with this, but I also don't want to take too much time. We have a program at my center, Tia Chucha Centro Cultural, working with formerly incarcerated and incarcerated people. It's called Trauma to Transformation. And the reason we called it that is that people tend to talk about the trauma and they pile on the trauma. We're all carrying trauma, but they hardly ever talk about that the transformative human being gets transformed through the trauma. You know what I'm saying? Whatever you've been through is actually the pathway to become whole and healthy. The brokenness is a pathway. It's important to point that out because people want to say, well, the trauma is, they either pile it on you, you can't do nothing about it, you're stuck, you have no traction, you're carrying these dead things around, the pain and losses and everything, you're carrying them around, you can't move. We're telling people, don't carry the corpse of the dead things, but carry the energy of becoming fully whole and human through them. The wounds that we have are also the pathway to our gifts. So I think all your emotional is part of that. Expressing it is part of the importance because how many people, as you know, in the pintas and wherever they may be, can't express nothing. They have to explode because there's no other way to express it. It's really sad that we have human beings that can't be fully human. Now, I'm aware that people can express things and tear things down. I get it. That's why it's got to be transformative. That's why when your anger gets changed, it becomes not just a fire, but a precise fire. You know what I mean? You really can point to what it is that gets you mad. Anger, properly addressed, has eyes. It knows where it's going. If it's not properly addressed, not helped, not guided, not knowing where it's going, it will be blind rage. You know what I'm saying? You know, just going off, just losing it, turning red, destroying whatever you can. You have to have that anger and it has to be given precision. I hope this makes sense because that's what we teach a lot of the men and women and youth that we work with in these institutions and coming out of the institutions. You're right to be angry. You're right to be emotionally engaged. You're right, but do it with precision, with proper fire. You know, the right fire that can actually move things, not burn things. I hope that makes sense, but I appreciate your question very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I am so glad that we took these two questions. I think that they were so important. I think this idea of righteous rage and how to pour it into the positivity and the type of rebirth we want to see is super important. And so we're going to be just a little behind, but that's okay. I think we're all here for it. And thank you so much, Luis Rodriguez. We're going to push ahead with DJ Mestizo.
So I'm going to say my goodbyes to everybody. Love you all. Be safe. You know,
thank you. Please, we did not use this conference to promote his campaign, but we would like for you all to seek out and learn about Luis's work. Like this, snippet of 40 minutes was not even enough. So thank you all so much.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Bye, Luis.
Awesome. All right. Okay. So we will not return at 10. We will maybe return at 10:05.
10:05 is good. Yes.
Okay, let's do it. And I think Anna or Lupe will explain to you how you can choose what session you would like to go to next at 10:05.
Yes, so we're going to be opening the rooms. We're going to open them up during the break. And you're going to see the options to join. There are 11 options, but only 4 of them are for the first session. So it'll say session A1, session A2, A3, and A4. And you are welcome to choose whichever session you would like to join. We found that that was the easiest way to assign folks because we had a lot of people registering for the conference over the past day or two. If you can see that a room doesn't have too many participants, we would love it if you would be willing to give that room a chance so that we can have somewhat of an equal participation in each room. I'm positive that each of these rooms will be transformative, no matter which one you choose. So we're gonna go ahead and open those rooms. And at 10:05, we hope that everyone will already be self-assigned into session A1, 2, 3, or 4. Thank you.
on and cop out. You will not be able to lose yourself on Skag and skip out for beer during commercials because the revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew to eat hog maws confiscated from a Harlem sanctuary. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by the Schaefer Award Theater and will not star Natalie Woods and Steve McQueen or Bullwinkle and Julia. The revolution will not give your mouth sex appeal. The revolution will not get rid of the nub. The revolution will not make you look 5 pounds thinner because the revolution will not be televised, brother. There will be no pictures of you and Willie Mae pushing that shopping cart down the block on the dead run or trying to slide that color TV into a stolen ambulance. NBC will not be able to predict the winner at 8:32 on report from 29 districts. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of pigs shooting down brothers on the instant replay. There will be no pictures of Whitney Young being run out of Harlem on a rail with a brand new process. There will be no slow motion or still life of Roy Wilkins strolling through Watts in a red, black, and green liberation jumpsuit that he has been saving for just the proper occasions. Green Acres, Beverly Hillbillies, and Hooterville Junction will no longer be so damn relevant, and women will not care if Dick finally got down with Jane on Search for Tomorrow, because black people will be in the street looking for a brighter day. The revolution will not be televised. There will be no highlights on the 11 o'clock news and no pictures of Harry armed women liberationists and Jackie Onassis blowing her nose. The theme song will not be written by Jim Webb or Francis Scott Key, nor sung by Glenn Campbell, Tom Jones, Johnny Cash, Engelbert Humperdinck, or The Rare Earth. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be right back after a message about a white tornado, white lightning, or white people. You will not have to worry about a dove in your bedroom, the tiger in your tank, or the giant in your toilet bowl. The revolution will not go better with Coke. The revolution will not fight germs that may cause bad breath. The revolution will put you in the driver's seat. The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live.
And for those that are here, the sessions will most likely they have already started. So at the bottom of the Zoom, you can go on and click more if you don't see the breakout rooms. And then you have 4 options. Session A, you can see A1, and you can see the title and the presenter. Session A2,